Which way are they going to go? Which way are they going to go? Hi, welcome to the channel. My name is Red Dan. I'm a vicar in the Church of England. On this channel I get all my views as a parish priest on the latest Christian news coming out. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, comment and share. Also, don't forget to click that notification bell. So a General Synod imminently up on us. This is part 2 of a 3-part series looking at a paper that has come out by the Bishop of Leicester, setting out different aspects. The first part of the video was the 10 commitments that he would like the General Synod to commit to going forward. You can watch that video here. Today it's all about the different routes that they might put the prayers of love and faith through. And the next video, probably the biggest video and the most controversial one, is about priests entering into same-sex marriages. So today we're looking at the outline of routes for authorization of standalone prayers of love and faith. So in this paper, and actually, you know, we got to say well done in putting this paper out, even though I might not agree with all of it. At least it's being more transparent. It's speaking about the difficulties of this whole process, and today and in the next video we'll see some of the legal stuff coming through which we haven't really seen before. Today we're going to be looking at the different routes that they could be proposing or could use, and the benefits, really, if there are any benefits, and complications to using each of the different routes. So with the Oxford Amendment being voted through in the Synod last November, which asked the House of Bishops to look at using standalone services for an experimental period, this affects the routes which they are going to take. And the first route we're going to look at is Canon B5A. Canon B5A provides for the archbishops, after consultation with the House of Bishops, to authorise a form of service for experimental use for a period specified by them on such terms and in such places or parishes as they may designate. The term form of service, when used in the canons, includes any matter to be used as part of a service and is not restricted in its meaning to entire services. It can therefore include prayers that are intended to be used within other previously authorised services, such as Holy Communion or a service of the Word. The form of service must be one which has been prepared with a view to its submission to the General Synod for approval by the Synod under Canon B2. The purpose of the experimental period is intended to inform the subsequent consideration of the form of service which is proposed for approval under Canon B2. Any form of service approved by the General Synod must be such as, in the opinion of the General Synod, is neither contrary to or indicative of any departure from the doctrine of the Church of England in any essential matter. Therefore, a form of service authorised for experimental use under Canon B5A must be one which the archbishops, having consulted with the House of Bishops, consider meets that requirement, even though this condition is not set out in Canon B5A itself. The period for which the forms of service is authorised for experimental use must be specified by the archbishops when the authorisation is given. So in using Canon B5A for the experimental services for the specified period, it's specified as for an amount of time and only in certain parishes as well. It could just be used in that one sense, but because it's going to be followed by Canon B2, which includes the vote in the House of Bishops, laity and clergy, the whole General Synod, and must require for that to pass 2/3 voting in favour it in each of the houses. They are now having to set out what the service will look like, because it's not going to change too much to what is going to be proposed by Canon B2. So when the archbishops and through the House of Bishops set out the service, we will see the liturgy, what's being said, perhaps some of the practicalities of what's being worn and all these things. Will it look like a wedding? How much will it differ from that if it's not going to look like that? What are the stipulations to say this mustn't happen and that is allowed to happen? Remember the important part here, that it cannot be seen as a departure from doctrine. They've added in any essential matter because that's what they're using in the canons that they stated there. But the big argument will be at General Synod when this comes out for the experimental period is it departing from doctrine? Now there's going to be the argument over in any essential matter. That's what the House of Bishops are putting forward and the archbishops. But we would have to wait and see on that one. But we will see what the service will look like. So going on to the considerations and questions from using Canon B5A. The first consideration is a pastoral one, they say, where if the vote of Canon B2, that means the services are not brought in and canon law changed, then this experimental use of B5A would mean that everything falls by the wayside. And what does that mean for those couples that have come to have same-sex blessings? What does that mean for those churches? And they say, were the vote not to pass, the standalone services could not be used. In what position would this leave those couples who have taken part in standalone services, or who would have planned for one, which can no longer happen? What would be the impact on those ministers who had used the standalone services? But it does beg the question, by doing this experimental period of standalone services, and for those having the blessings, if it doesn't get voted through, what does that mean for that blessing theologically and also pastorally? The second consideration is that Canon B5A has not before been used to introduce new rights to the worship of the church in the matter that is proposed by the PLF standalone services. As this would be a new and for some controversial use of the canon, there remains a considerable risk of legal challenge in the courts. So this is good while they are being open and honest about the legal implications, because even though the vote went through of the Oxford Amendment back in November, there are legal challenges that it might not be able to actually be used, because if it goes to court, and remember back in the 10 commitments, which I did in my last video, they're asking please don't take each other to court, which I believe no one's going to agree to that anyway, because it is a route to stop this. There's considerable risk of a legal challenge, they say. So is this legal? Well, they're saying, look, it hasn't been used before in this way at all. They are creating something new that has never been done before. And there's a lot of questions about that happening, because why are you using this canon to do something like this if it's never been used? And the danger is, this is always the danger, if this happens, it sets a precedent for other things to come through the same way. But it goes on to say, these concerns do not prevent the House of Bishops from exploring this option. So even though there's two concerns, so like a pastoral one and a legal one, it doesn't stop them from considering. Well, it doesn't stop them from considering, but in a sense they are really moving forward and really looking at this option, even if it could mean going to court. But what they want to do with Canon B5A is to use it for a trial period in certain churches that apply for permission to use it, so they can gain feedback on the service that is put out, where it works, where it doesn't work, working with the liturgical commission, and then so when it comes to Canon B2, they have a document, a liturgy, which they could put to General Synod, which is being through, in a sense, a trial and error revision. But the question comes up, how do they do this? Do they do Canon B5A in conjunction with Canon B2, or do they do it separately, or one starting first and one started after? And they consider that in this document. So the first one is using the Canon B5A process in parallel with Canon B2. And it says running the Canon B5A process requires a specific period of experimental use. So it would not be lawful to start both a B5A and a B2 process at the same time. So that one's basically, as you can hear or read, out the window. Secondly, Canon B5A process overlapping with the B52 process. So by choosing this way, Canon B5A, perhaps they would be used for 6 months, and then in General Synod they would start the Canon B2 process, so it overlaps. But in bold, it says in the document, there is a medium to high risk that conducting an overlapping Canon B5A and a Canon B2 process would be successfully challenged in the courts. So even though they could choose this option, it could be successfully challenged with they say medium to high risk. So I think the courts would uphold that this is not lawful. And they go on to say, again in bold, the advice from the legal office is that reading Canon B5A and Canon B2 together, the better interpretation of the text is that the experimental period under Canon B5A must come to an end before the formal service is submitted for approval under Canon B2. And by doing this, having Canon B5A here for that period and then stopping and then starting Canon B2, well, it says it will just basically take the whole process a lot longer. So by using the Canon B5A process, then followed by the B2 process, It says the legal risk would be much lower because this would be a much more conventional experimental period. So the other option that they put down is to drop Canon B5A process and only just go straight to Canon B2. That's just basically starting the process in the General Synod, which is really what they voted for back in February. So what they say in the final part of this section, they say in the effect of final approval, they said, should Synod give final approval, this would conclusively determine that the Synod were of opinion that the former service was not contrary to nor indicative of any departure from the doctrine of the Church of England in any essential matter. So right in this part here, that it would conclusively determine, if it got voted through, that this is not indicative or contrary to any departure from the doctrine of the Church of England is, I just can't see that, because it either is or isn't. It doesn't depend on numbers here. It depends on us standing on the Word of God, and it is a departure from doctrine. It has to be. If you are changing this and you're changing the canons and you change a doctrine to allow this, then it has to be a departure from the doctrine that we hold at the moment. So just because, if you get more liberals in General Synod than conservatives, it's going to pass through. And what they're saying is this would conclusively determine, and I don't think it actually conclusively determines, how the whole of the Church of England sees this. Yes, I know General Synod is, people stand to vote and it's a fair process, but I just can't see how this would conclusively determine, just because General Synod would vote for that if it got through, that it wasn't a departure. It is a departure. Next they come on to commendation, and this is where the House of Bishops, without going through General Synod, can just commend the prayers of love and faith, and they could do that under Canon B5, and in the document it says, commendation does not definitively determine the question of whether a former service is lawful. This would leave ministers offering these services to open to the possibility of a complaint being brought against them individually or under the Ecclesiastical Jurisdiction Measure 1963 or the Clergy Discipline Measure 2003. Again in bold, the bishops have listened and take very seriously the concerns around ministers bearing the legal risk of using the PLF. This is why they have been considering alternative routes for authorising the standalone services that enable the greatest legal protection for those clergy who wish to use them. And again, the question comes back that if you are legally vulnerable, if you go and use these services, if they're not done in the right way, then you are having to change canon law. And if you're having to change canon law in such a way, and people are legally vulnerable if you don't, then surely this doesn't seem to be the right way to do in this, and it shouldn't be done at all, right? So the summary of the routes that they go through authorization or commendation are: Canon B2, liturgical approval by the General Synod, ultimately requiring a 2/3 majority. Canon B5A, authorization by the archbishops for a set period of experimental use, usually expected to be followed by a B2 process as above. Canon B42, approved by the archbishops for use in the provinces of Canterbury and York. Canon B43, approved by the individual ordinaries for use in their own diocese. And Canon B5, commendation by the House of Bishops for use by ministers exercising their discretion. And you just heard there two of the canons which weren't mentioned: Canon B42 and Canon B43. Now these aren't considered for two reasons really. If it went through Canon B42 with the archbishops, they're open to legal challenge directly themselves. If it went through Canon B43, which is for the bishops of each diocese, there'd be bishops who do it and bishops who don't. So it would kind of be a postcode lottery, as it were. So you can see there's no straightforward process except for going through Canon B2, which is go through General Synod. Having the Oxford Amendment in there adds more complications to them. It looks as though they're going to go Canon B5A followed by Canon B2. Less legal challenge to that, but it's going to be a longer drawn out process, which would take it potentially into the next General Synod, and that will then come down to numbers again, how many people they get into the General Synod, either wanting to do it or not wanting to do it. So it's all over the place, but it has to go through Canon B2, whatever happens anyway. I'm going to leave a table that they put up there, looking at each of the canons, looking at the negatives and the positives and the time frames. You can pause on the video and look at what they're saying. It is all over the place. We're going to see what happens at General Synod about this and what they're going to recommend. We might not hear this in February. It might come to July, but there you have it. There's all the roots. It's always fun learning new things, isn't it?